Cold young millionaire only wanted a friend with benefits until he met her on a blind date. 5 minutes late, Ryan muttered, checking his Rolex for the third time. The restaurant, an upscale fusion spot in Manhattan, buzzed softly with conversation. Ambient lighting gave everything a golden hue. Ryan Shaw, young, wealthy, self-made, sat at a private table near the window, watching rain drizzle against the glass. His tailored charcoal suit and crisp white shirt made him look every bit the successful entrepreneur. Except his face was set into a mild scowl, displeased by this trivial tardiness. He glanced up as he heard the click of heels on polished wood. There she was, approaching with a slightly apologetic smile. Alice Donovan, the name his friend and her co-worker Brandon had given him. Brandon's exact words were, "She's not like the others you've met, Ryan. She's genuine." Ryan had rolled his eyes at that. In his experience, genuine usually just meant unaware of the game, and he rarely cared to elaborate the rules. But he was here, giving this a shot, mostly because Brandon wouldn't stop bugging him. Alice looked different from the women Ryan usually dated. She wore a simple navy dress that highlighted her slim figure without screaming for attention. Her dark brown hair fell softly around her shoulders, and there was a sort of natural beauty in her face. No excessive makeup, just a hint of lipstick, and an honest, open look in her hazel eyes. "Hi," she said, slightly out of breath. "I'm sorry I'm late. The crosstown traffic was—" "5 minutes," Ryan cut in, his voice low and flat. "I don't appreciate people being late." Alice blinked. "It was just a little traffic. I left early, but the cabs—" He lifted a hand, a gesture to stop. "I don't like excuses. If this is already too challenging, we can call it a night." Alice's eyes narrowed. She pulled out the chair and sat down anyway. Something about his tone made her want to push back. "Is punctuality the measure of a human being's worth to you?" He leaned forward, studying her face. "I value efficiency, clarity. I have no interest in wasting time." Alice folded her hands in her lap, resisting the urge to walk out. Brandon said Ryan was a bit aloof, but she hadn't expected outright rudeness. Still, she was curious. "I don't want to waste your time," she said, her tone turning cooler. "So why don't you tell me what you're looking for, Ryan?" He nodded as if he appreciated her directness. "Fine. I'm not here for romance or fairy tales. I'm not searching for a relationship with strings attached. I prefer a simple arrangement. No emotional entanglements, just companionship and physical benefits. A friend with benefits, if you will. That's what I'm looking for." Alice's jaw tightened. She had to be sure she heard correctly. "Are you seriously proposing that on a blind date? You don't even know me." He shrugged, the corners of his mouth turning down. "I'm laying all my cards on the table. I don't do love, Alice. It's a waste of effort." "If that doesn't suit you, then feel free to leave." For a moment, she was speechless. She stared at this man, handsome, clearly wealthy, probably accustomed to women throwing themselves at him. She felt a surge of disappointment and, surprisingly, pity. He was the very model of what she despised, someone who reduced human connection to a transaction. Alice stood. She wanted to slam her chair back, but maintained her composure. "I find your offer insulting, Ryan. If all you see in people is a means to an end, I want no part of it." She picked up her clutch. "I'll spare us both any more wasted time. Have a nice life." He watched her walk away, spine straight, shoulders set, not glancing back. Instead of feeling relief, Ryan experienced a flicker of something unexpected. Regret, or maybe curiosity. Most women he proposed such arrangements to either got offended quietly and left, or tried to persuade him otherwise, or revealed their own interest in his money. Alice had stood her ground with pride and dignity. She'd looked disappointed in him, not intimidated. That was unusual and had lodged in his mind an uncomfortable thorn. Outside, Alice stepped into the cool autumn air. She was furious at him, at Brandon's misguided matchmaking. Yet, beneath the anger, there was a knot of sadness. She sensed something broken in Ryan. Something that made him treat others this way. She hated that she could even feel a pinch of compassion for such a jerk. She shook it off, determined never to see him again. Back at the table, Ryan sipped his sparkling water, staring out the window as the city lights blurred in the rain. He barely knew her, yet her reaction left a strange aftertaste. He told himself it didn't matter. He didn't need anyone's approval. Love was a sham, as he'd learned long ago. And yet, why did he find himself wishing he'd handled things differently? Ryan's penthouse overlooked Central Park. By all external measures, he was living the American dream, a rags-to-riches story. Tech entrepreneur, having sold a startup at 28 for millions. At 32, he managed investments, enjoyed expensive suits and fine whiskey, but lived mostly alone save for the occasional arrangement. The interior was minimalist, modern artwork, leather couches, and tasteful neutrals, but there were no family photos, no personal knickknacks. That night, Ryan found himself distracted. He scrolled through emails on his laptop, trying to ignore an odd heaviness in his chest. He remembered Alice's face when he proposed the Feb deal, shock, then anger, then that subtle sorrow. He didn't like that look. It reminded him of the shame name he buried deep inside. The hurtful memories of his past. He replayed scenes from years ago too quickly to stop them. His parents' vicious divorce, the girlfriend in college who laughed when he said, "I love you," responding with, "Show me the money," first. He'd been burned and he'd promised himself never again. It was easier to keep it simple. Treat relationships like business deals less messy. Meanwhile, several blocks downtown, Alice's apartment was a warm, cozy studio filled with plants, books, and handwritten notes pinned to a bulletin board. She worked in nonprofit marketing, helping raise funds for educational programs and underprivileged communities. She valued empathy and kindness, traits she tried to live by since childhood. Growing up in a small Ohio town, she lost her first serious boyfriend in a car accident at 20, a tragedy that taught her the fragility and preciousness of genuine love. She refused to settle for anything less, sitting at her small desk. Alice tried to focus on a grant proposal that needed final touches, but her mind drifted to Ryan. She was angry at herself for thinking about him at all. Still, he was so unapologetically cold. It made her wonder what made a man like that. Had he ever truly cared for anyone? Her friend and co-worker Melanie called. "So, how was the date with that mysterious millionaire Brandon set you up with?" Alice snorted, "Disastrous. He basically asked me to be his casual hookup within 5 minutes. Oh God, what a creep." Melanie said, "I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, just annoyed. He was so hollow, all money, no heart." Alice's voice softened. She tried to forget him, focusing instead on the kids who would benefit from the upcoming literacy campaign she was spearheading. That was real, that mattered. Ryan's phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. "Dude, what happened?" Alice said it didn't go well. He typed back curtly, "We wanted different things, so I ended it." And replied, "Man, she's not some random. She's good people. You might have misread this." Ryan rolled his eyes. He hadn't misread anything. He just didn't care. At least that's what he told himself. Yet in the following days, as he went through routine meetings and business lunches, Ryan found himself distracted by memories. Of Alice's defiance, he often prided himself on intimidating others, but she'd refuse to be swayed by his money or status. This intrigued him in a way he couldn't fully comprehend, and it irritated him that he cared at all. Meanwhile, Alice immersed herself in her non-profit's activities. A major fundraising gala was coming up. In a few weeks, an event where wealthy donors and philanthropic leaders gathered to support building a network of community libraries. She was excited to help children discover the magic of reading. She loved seeing kids gain confidence through literacy. It reminded her of her childhood when a kind teacher encouraged her to read despite her family's final financial struggles. She hoped never to run into Ryan Shaw again. They had no reason to cross paths. He lived in a world of high finance and superficial encounters. She preferred heartfelt connections and meaningful work, but fate, with all its ironic twists, had other plans. As it turned out, one of the event's major silent donors had invited Ryan to attend. Ryan often gave to charity primarily for tax breaks and image reasons, but still he attended a few functions to maintain appearances. Unbeknownst to both of them, their paths would cross again, and this time the encounter would not be so easily brushed aside. The evening of the gala arrived. The venue was a grand ballroom in a restored historic building overlooking the Hudson River. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in warm light, and round tables were adorned with elegant centerpieces of white lilies and candles. Gentle jazz music played in the background while guests sipped champagne and mingled. Ryan stood near a display of children's artwork drawings made by the kids who would benefit from the libraries. He was nursing a glass of bourbon, looking handsome in a tailored navy suit. He was here reluctantly. His advisor had insisted that maintaining a philanthropic presence was good PR for Ryan. It was a chore. Another facade to keep up. He took a swig of his drink and turned to inspect the crowd. That's when he spotted her. Alice, wearing a simple but elegant emerald green dress, was talking with a group of educators. There was a glow about her. Her sincerity in her laughter, she fit into this environment effortlessly, her compassion evident in the way she listened. Intently, Ryan felt a strange flutter in his chest, annoyance that he cared mixed with curiosity. Would she acknowledge him or pretend he didn't exist? Alice eventually noticed him from across the room. She stiffened. The last person she wanted to see in a place that celebrated human kindness was the man who treated relationships like business deals. She considered ignoring him, yet her eyes flicked back to him several times, drawn by something she couldn't name. Later in the evening, Alice found herself repositioning a small easel that held a painting made by a group of children. Suddenly, Ryan appeared beside her, as if materializing from the crowd. "Surprised to see you here," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral, but unable to hide her suspicion. Ryan inclined his head. "I'm involved in various charitable activities. I donate to this foundation every year." Alice looked up at him, arching an eyebrow. "For the tax write-off." I'm sure he sipped his drink. "Does it matter why I do it? As long as the children benefit." She frowned. "Motives matter. Genuine support versus buying an image. It affects how you engage, how you respect the beneficiaries." Ryan's jaw tightened. Why did her opinion matter to him? He sat down his glass. "You assumed too much. You don't know me and you don't know me." Alice counter-holding her ground. "Yet you asked me, a complete stranger, for a no-strings physical arrangement, as if I was a commodity." He winced internally at the memory. "I was direct. I see no point in hiding intentions. Most people appreciate honesty." Alice shook her head, her voice lower, sadness threading through it. That's not honesty, that's cynicism. You see relationships as transactions. I believe in connections that mean something, that help us grow. Isn't that what we're all doing here tonight, trying to give meaning to something bigger than ourselves? He stared at her, momentarily speechless. She turned away to help a child who had just arrived with a volunteer, an 8-year-old boy shyly presenting his handmade bookmark to a donor. Ryan felt odd. Alice's words hit him deeper than he expected. He left the conversation and wandered through the ballroom, but her voice echoed in his mind. An hour later, when a silent auction commenced to raise funds for the libraries, Ryan watched as Alice introduced the items with genuine enthusiasm. One piece in particular, a collage of children's drawings, caught his attention. Without hesitating, he placed a high bid. When his name was announced as the winner, Alice looked at him from across the room, perplexed. After the event, when most guests had left, Alice stayed behind to help tidy up. She was surprised to find Ryan lingering near the stage, holding the collage wrapped in protective paper. "You bought that?" she said quietly. Approaching him, he shrugged. "It's going to my office. The kids put effort into it." She studied his face. Was this another calculated move? Yet his eyes seemed softer tonight. "Thank you. The money will help fund a reading corner for the new library." Ryan nodded. Silence stretched between them. Finally, he spoke, his tone more subdued. "I may have been rude at our first meeting. I apologize. That was not the right approach." Alice folded her arms. She wasn't sure what to believe, but at least he acknowledged his wrongdoing. Apology accepted. "But if you think a simple sorry makes it all better..." He raised a hand. "No, I don't expect that. I just want you to know I realize I crossed a line." He hesitated, then added, "Your work here, helping these kids, it's commendable." Alice felt her defenses waver. She appreciated his acknowledgement, but wouldn't be easily convinced. Still, tonight, he had shown a slightly different side, less arrogant, more willing to meet her eyes. These children deserve every chance. That's why I'm passionate about it. I lost someone once who loved learning and teaching me that knowledge and empathy matter more than wealth. Ryan's expression flickered as if he recognized pain behind her words. He wanted to ask more, but it felt too personal. They parted ways with a polite nod. As Alice headed home, she found herself reevaluating Ryan. He was still a mystery, but maybe not just a hollow shell. Perhaps there was a crack in that armor. Ryan walked out into the crisp night air, feeling strangely unsettled. He didn't often care what others thought of him. Yet Alice's judgment weighed on him for the first time in a long while. He considered that perhaps he had been wrong in how he approached relationships. The thought was uncomfortable, but not entirely unwelcome. Over the next few weeks, life moved on. Ryan was busy finalizing a major real estate investment deal, while Alice continued working on educational initiatives. Yet fate seemed to enjoy throwing them into each other's path. They ran into each other at a local coffee shop near Alice's nonprofit office. To his ear, ordering a black coffee, they recognized each other and exchanged a brief nod. The next time was at a community workshop where volunteers trained to read to children at a local shelter. Ryan had been invited by a business associate who supported the same cause. He hadn't expected Alice to be one of the lead organizers. When he saw her explaining the importance of interactive reading, he lingered at the back, fascinated by her passion. After the workshop, Ryan approached her. "I seem to be stumbling into your world more than I expected." Alice gave a slight smile. "The philanthropic world is smaller than you think. Good to see you being more involved." He noted the teasing note in her voice. "I'm here purely because a partner asked me to attend." The words came out too sharp, and he regretted it. He amended, "I have to admit, the session was enlightening. I never thought reading aloud could make such a difference." She studied him, trying to read between the lines. Was that a genuine compliment? "It can," she replied. "A caring adult who reads to a child can spark a lifelong love of learning." Ryan nodded slowly, recalling his own childhood, absent parents, a quiet home, and the way he taught himself from borrowed library books. He'd forgotten how comforting the act of reading could be. They talked more that day about the kids and the importance of mentorship. Alice was pleasantly surprised by his attentiveness. He asked questions, real questions, not superficial ones. For a moment, she allowed herself to see him as more than just the man who offended her weeks ago. However, the tension between their values remained. Ryan's cynicism about love and deep emotional ties was still there, lurking beneath his attempts to be cordial. Alice, though warming slightly, maintained her guard. It came unexpectedly when Ryan decided to test the waters to see if Alice might be open to something non-committal. They were sitting at a quiet corner of a bookstore cafe, a neutral ground after he'd asked to learn more about the reading materials she recommended for the library kids. He looked at her over his espresso. "We've been getting along better lately," he ventured. "I know we started off on the wrong foot, but I find your company enjoyable. Maybe we could spend time together outside these events. Just keep things light, fun." Alice's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by light? Are you suggesting something like that first night again?" He held up his hands. "Not exactly. I'm just saying I'm not interested in the whole romantic entanglement, the so-called love story. But I appreciate you, and maybe we could—" She cut him off, anger flaring. "Ryan, have you learned nothing? I told you I won't accept anything less than respect and sincerity. I'm not going to be your casual pastime because you're too afraid to trust someone." He stiffened. "Afraid? I'm just being rational. Love is a risk that rarely pays off. Friendship, mutual enjoyment, those can be simpler." Alice stood, her voice shaking with frustration and disappointment. "Stop reducing human connection to transactions. What we're doing for these kids, don't you see? It's all about trust, hope, compassion. If you can't even open yourself to the possibility that real feelings matter, we have nothing more to say." She grabbed her coat and left, leaving Ryan feeling as though he'd just taken a step backward. He had meant to be careful, but he ended up insulting her again. Her words, "afraid to trust," echoed in his mind. Was he afraid? That night, alone in his penthouse, Ryan couldn't focus on work. He gazed at the children's collage he had bought at the gala. He remembered a little boy's shy smile. The world Alice inhabited was foreign to him, full of caring and risking one's heart. Was he truly missing out, or was he protecting himself? For Alice, this was a breaking point. She had begun to see potential in Ryan's kindness, but his reluctance to value genuine emotional connection hurt her. She didn't need a casual fling. She needed someone who believed that love, even with all its risks, was worth trying for. A week passed with no contact. Alice focused on the literacy program's next phase, building a pilot library in a low-income neighborhood. The blueprint was ready and the nonprofit needed a substantial donation to make it happen. She tried other avenues for funding, but the economy was tight and donors were cautious. She refused to consider asking Ryan for help. She wanted no favors from someone who didn't respect the value of true connection. But life had surprises in store. Brandon, the mutual friend who'd arranged the blind date, approached Ryan about the library project. Brandon worked in a consulting firm that had partnered with Alice's nonprofit, and he knew the struggle they faced. He convinced Ryan to consider supporting the project, not for tax breaks, but because the community needed it. Ryan at first resisted, remembering Alice's angry departure. But something nagged at him. He'd attended those workshops, seen the kids' faces. He understood, at least intellectually, that this library could change lives. A quiet voice inside him whispered, "Maybe this is your chance to show Alice you're capable of more than self-interest." He arranged a meeting with the nonprofit's board. At first, they were wary. He had a reputation as a tough negotiator, but he surprised them by offering a sizable donation with minimal conditions. News reached Alice through the organization's director. She was stunned. Why would Ryan help now? The next time they crossed paths was at a construction site where the future library would stand. Alice came to inspect the ground. To her surprise, Ryan was already there, speaking with the construction manager. He wore a casual blazer, not his usual power suit, and something about his posture seemed different. She approached cautiously. "I heard about your donation. Thank you, it means a lot to the community." Ryan turned, hands in pockets, looking earnest. "I did it because I believe in the cause," he said, and to his own surprise, he found that he meant it. "I know you probably think I'm doing this for show, but I thought about what you said. Helping these kids is worthwhile. I want to be part of that." Alice searched his face. She saw no hint of condescension. Maybe he had changed, at least a little. "I'm glad," she said quietly. "The library is going to make a real difference." They stood there, the bustle of the city around them, sharing a moment that felt almost peaceful. Slowly, over the following weeks, they spent more time discussing project details. Ryan asked about the kids, the curriculum, how reading would be encouraged. He volunteered to help secure a supplier for laptops. He listened when Alice explained the importance of reading mentors. Every interaction chipped away at the wall between them. Alice began to trust that Ryan's interest wasn't just an act. She saw glimpses of a man who cared. Someone who'd been hurt and was afraid, but who wanted to find another way. And Ryan, for his part, found that he enjoyed these conversations more than any casual fling. He admired Alice's strength, her moral clarity, and her refusal to compromise on what mattered. They grew closer. One afternoon, after touring a completed section of the library's interior, they ended up at a small diner nearby. Over burgers and fries, simple comfort food, they talked about their pasts. Alice confessed her old heartbreak, losing her first love to tragedy. She explained why she cherished love so fiercely, because she knew how easily it could be lost and how precious it was. Ryan listened, shaken by her honesty. He told her haltingly about his parents' bitter divorce and the ex who only wanted his money. He admitted, "I got scared of loving. Easier to have no strings, no pain. But I see now that's just fear talking." Alice reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Fear is normal, but don't let it steal all the good things in life." This moment brought them close to something like understanding, maybe even the start of love. But their bond would face one more test. Just as the library project neared completion, a crisis struck Ryan's business. His partner, Philip, who hated the idea of wasting resources on charity, confronted him. Philip threatened to pull out of a major real estate deal if Ryan didn't divert funds back from the nonprofit. The ultimatum was clear: choose profit or philanthropy. Ryan was torn. He'd always chosen profit in the past, but now this library wasn't just a tax break. It was a promise to the community and to Alice. If he gave in, he'd betray the trust he was building. If he refused, he risked losing millions. He met Alice that evening at the library site, where she was helping organize books donated by local schools. The building had the scent of fresh paint and wood polish. Children's murals were being painted on the walls. It felt hopeful, alive. Alice saw the tension on his face. "What's wrong?" He told her about Philip's threat. Her heart sank. "What will you do?" Ryan looked around at the newly installed shelves, the reading corners filled with bright beanbag chairs. He thought of the kids waiting to discover their favorite storybook. He turned to Alice, voice resolute. "I'm not pulling out. Let Philip leave if he wants. This project matters more." Tears sprang to Alice's eyes. She saw this was a turning point for Ryan. He was risking substantial financial gain for something he believed in and for someone he cared about. In that moment, a gust of wind blew through the open doors, as if sealing his decision. Alice stepped closer. "Thank you," she whispered, "for choosing what's right." Ryan's heart pounded. He realized he wanted her to know he wasn't just doing this for her approval, but because he believed in it now. "I'm tired of living behind walls," he said softly. "I've watched you trust, care, and I see the strength in it. I want that too." They stood there, the late afternoon sun slanting across the half-finished library floor. Ryan reached for Alice's hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled through her tears and leaned in. He wrapped his arms around her gently, as if holding something infinitely precious. The library opened 2 weeks later. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was a modest affair with local families, teachers, donors, and a handful of press in attendance. Ryan stood beside Alice as a group of children lined up at the door, excited to enter a place that promised stories and adventures. When Alice snipped the ribbon, cheers erupted, and Ryan's chest swelled with a pride he hadn't felt in years. Alice guided him inside. Colorful shelves displayed picture books, young adult novels, and educational material. A small reading circle had beanbags arranged in a semicircle. A volunteer read aloud to a group of wide-eyed youngsters, while another helped a teenager find a book on astronomy. Ryan watched Alice crouch down to talk to a little girl clutching a new library card. The girl asked shyly, "Can I take this book home?" Alice explained how borrowing worked, smiling gently. The scene hit Ryan hard. This was what all the fuss was about, changing lives one book at a time. A reporter approached asking Ryan about his involvement. He responded honestly, "I believe in what this library stands for. It's about giving kids a chance to dream, to learn, to imagine a better future. I'm proud to be part of it." Later, as the crowd thinned, Alice and Ryan found a quiet corner near a window that overlooked the neighborhood. A soft autumn breeze drifted in. They stood side by side, shoulders touching. "You did something incredible," Alice said. "These children will remember this place their whole lives." Ryan smiled. "We did it. You inspired me." She turned to him, eyes shining. "It's not just about the library, is it? You've changed." He nodded, taking her hand. "I've learned that love, care, and risking your heart doesn't mean you'll be weak. It can make you stronger. I was wrong to think otherwise." They walked outside, strolling down the street. The afternoon light was warm on their faces. He offered her his arm, and she looped hers through it. They passed a mural where children had drawn flowers, books, and rainbows. The air smelled of distant food trucks and city life. Over the following weeks, Ryan and Alice spent more time together. Dinners at small family-owned restaurants, walks in the park, evenings discussing novels and history. Ryan found he enjoyed not having his guard up. Alice showed him how trust could be built one honest conversation at a time. On a crisp Saturday afternoon, they ventured out of the city on a short road trip to a nearby orchard. This time, the weather turned suddenly bad. Heavy rain, a flat tire, and they had to take shelter at a tiny roadside motel. Instead of frustration, they laughed at their predicament. Sharing stories of childhood mishaps over hot chocolate from a vending machine in that cozy, unplanned moment, Ryan admitted softly, "Alice, I love you." She looked up, surprised but delighted. "You're sure? Love is no small word." He took her hands in his. "I'm sure. I used to think love was a liability. Now I know it's what gives life meaning. Meeting you, seeing your integrity changed everything." Alice's eyes welled with tears of joy. "I love you too, Ryan. I always believed you could open your heart if you gave yourself the chance." They kissed, a tender, warm embrace that tasted of sweet cocoa and hope. Outside, the rain pattered on the roof, but inside they built their own shelter of trust and love. Back in the city, as autumn gave way to a bright, crisp winter, their relationship deepened. Ryan made changes in his business, incorporating social responsibility into his ventures. He invited Alice to share her perspective, to help identify causes that needed support. He learned to value compassion not just as a marketing ploy, but as a guiding principle. Alice, for her part, found renewed faith in people's ability to change. After losing her first love, she never imagined she could find someone who would truly respect and cherish her values. With Ryan, she discovered that even the most guarded soul could learn to love again. On a quiet evening, as they strolled through a holiday market in Bryant Park, surrounded by the scent of pine and cinnamon, Ryan stopped at a small jewelry stall. He picked out a simple ring, a delicate band set with a tiny emerald that matched her eyes. Under twinkling lights, he knelt down, heart pounding but sure of himself. "Alice, will you build a future with me? Marry me?" She laughed, tears of happiness streaming. "Yes, Ryan, of course." They embraced as skaters glided across the nearby ice rink and vendors called out cheerful greetings. The city that once felt so cold to Ryan now shimmered with warmth and possibility. Their story comes full circle, from a cynical proposition on a blind date to a love that blooms against all odds. Vulnerability and genuine connection in their journey remind us that true love isn't about avoiding pain. It's about finding someone worth risking your heart for. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing to the Soul-Stirring Stories channel. Your support will help us continue to bring you heartfelt, inspiring tales that celebrate the transformative power of love and hope. Thank you for watching.